Rhaenyra Targaryen's claim to the throne is the focal point of House of the Dragon, and the dubiousness of that claim in the eyes of some is the genesis point for the Dance of the Dragons. Undeniably, Viserys' insistence that Rhaenyra remain his heir after the birth of his 3 sons, alongside the fact that the lords of Westeros had already pledged their allegiance to Rhaenyra prior to Viserys' marriage to Alicent, weighs the scale in her favor. But clearly Aegon and the Greens are contesting her claim based on thousands of years of Westerosi inheritance precedent. And ultimately, the dance is an incredibly complex war for this specific reason, that essentially, both sides have a very significant and legitimate claim to the throne. However, there is an interesting consideration to be made beyond whether or not each side has a valid argument for their inheritance of the Iron Throne. Because it's not just about whether or not someone can make a good case for their claim. A huge contributing factor is whether or not the people that the king or queen is meant to lead will actually follow them. And that sort of naturally invites the question, could the Iron Throne really be taken by a woman? Now, the question here isn't whether or not a woman would be capable of leading, because obviously they would. Nor is it really a question about if a woman could take the throne, because at least at some point, one will. The true question about Rhaenyra's prospects as a ruling queen in her own right is simply about whether or not the culture of Westeros would accept a woman's leadership at this point in time, or if Rhaenyra's possible victory in the Dance of the Dragons would eventually end up with constant challenges to her reign based on her gender alone. Because Viserys' decision to name Rhaenyra his heir comes at a very interesting time in Westerosi history. Jaehaerys I was Viserys' predecessor, and his wife, Queen Alysanne, was clearly keen to give women more rights, and she seemingly had the intention of giving women equal inheritance rights. However, when the throne was confronted with a succession crisis, Viserys himself was chosen by the lords of Westeros over Rhaenys Valerian and her children, who some argued had a better claim. For a TLDR refresher on this entire situation, essentially, Rhaenys' father Aemon was the elder brother of Viserys' father Balon, and Aemon was Jaehaerys' named heir. Aemon died before Jaehaerys, and although some pushed for Rhaenys to be named heir after him, Viserys' father Balon was named instead. Balon also died before Jaehaerys did, hence creating a succession crisis where the Great Council was called and Viserys was chosen as heir over Rhaenys and her children. And although Rhaenys is commonly called the Queen Who Never Was, her children are actually a key element of what her loss at the Great Council actually means. Because, although she is obviously a woman, by the time the Great Council was convened, Laenor was already born. It's fair to say that had she been chosen, then there also would have been a push for Laena to become queen as Rhaenys' oldest child. But it's entirely possible that Laena and Laenor could have been married according to Targaryen tradition, and thus Laenor would have become king either way. But what I think is more interesting in particular is that, despite the fact that Rhaenys was the child of Jaehaerys' elder son, despite the fact that Queen Alysanne specifically called Rhaenys the future queen, and despite the fact that Rhaenys already had a living male heir, Viserys was still chosen over her. Now, it is entirely possible that no one realized how severe Viserys and Aemma's fertility problems were going to be, as Rhaenyra was born in 97 AC, and the Great Council was convened 4 years later in 101 AC. But it still seems to speak to the overwhelming misogyny of Westerosi culture at that time. Yes, the council was undoubtedly heavily swayed by the fact that basically everyone casting the votes were men. However, it's also interesting that this prejudice went so far that they were essentially willing to bet that Viserys would have a male heir in the future, rather than making a safe bet on Rhaenys' already existing son. They were seemingly unwilling to even let a woman inherit for a single generation, likely because they didn't want this kind of a precedent to be set. But there is an interesting contemporary case of female inheritance that is often used as a potentially favorable example supporting Rhaenyra's claim that hasn't come up in House of the Dragon yet. And that is the case of Lady Jeyne Arryn. Lady Jeyne Arryn is undoubtedly a familiar name to many, and she will likely become familiar to everyone in future seasons of House of the Dragon. But what is relevant about her story actually happened largely far before the Dance of the Dragons began. Fair warning, while nothing significant to the main plot will be mentioned, spoilers will be discussed related to Jeyne Arryn and the situation going on in the Vale. Although she is an adult woman by the time the Civil War begins, Lady Jeyne had reigned over the Vale since the death of her father and elder brothers at the hands of the Stonecrows of the Hills when she was 3. Now, given that Jeyne Arryn was an Arryn and a woman, it should come as no surprise that she was on Rhaenyra's team. But the perception of her allegiance to her relative is couched in interesting terms. In Fire and Blood, House Arryn is written off as a potential green ally like this. Nor could House Arryn be relied upon, for the Eyrie was presently ruled by a woman, Lady Jeyne, the Maiden of the Vale, whose own rights might be called into question should Princess Rhaenyra be put aside. Of course, there is undoubtedly at least some truth to the speculation that Lady Jeyne was concerned about her own status if Rhaenyra's inheritance was questioned. But it's a very interesting presumption to make given that Rhaenyra is an Arryn. So assuming that Jeyne's loyalty was driven entirely by her gender is a really odd leap. It's also strange given that, at least according to Westerosi inheritance law, Jeyne arguably had no question or competition regarding her position. However, Jeyne Arryn is also a very interesting case because at least on paper, she was the unquestionable heir to the Vale. Her father and brothers all died, and she was the closest relative left to the prior Lord of the Vale. Ergo, she became Lady of the Vale. The nearest relative Lady Jeyne even had after the death of her immediate family was her first cousin. So again, it seems like her position should be unimpeachable. But in fact, her closest relative, and the legal heir behind her, did make a play to become Lord of the Eyrie. As Lady Jeyne explains to Jace in Fire and Blood, "Thrice have my own kin sought to replace me," Lady Jeyne told Prince Jacaerys. "My cousin Sir Arnold is wont to say that women are too soft to rule. I have him in one of my sky cells if you would like to ask him. Your Prince Daemon used his first wife most cruelly, it is true. But notwithstanding your mother's poor taste in consorts, she remains our rightful queen, and mine own blood besides, and Arryn on her mother's side. In this world of men, we women must band together. The Vale and its knights shall stand with her." How accurate the recollection of this particular conversation is will always be up for debate, just like everything else in Fire and Blood. But what isn't up for debate is that Lady Jeyne Arryn's cousin, Sir Arnold, did attempt to claim the Eyrie for himself twice, and the only possible reason he did so is because Lady Jeyne is a woman. And while clearly he didn't succeed, this entire situation seems to be a pretty relevant reflection of the kind of uphill battle Rhaenyra is facing and the status of female inheritance in Westeros at that point. In the case of Lady Arryn, we're talking about someone who has an unquestionable right to inherit the Eyrie based on Westerosi laws of succession, and who doesn't even have a close male relative like a brother or an uncle to compete with her claim. But based on her gender alone, her cousin who was behind her in the line of succession attempted to overthrow her 2 times. Compare that to a situation like Rhaenyra's, where her claim to the Iron Throne is based on her father's declaration but goes against Westerosi laws of succession, and who has 3 trueborn brothers too. In the eyes of many, she is not the legal inheritor in the way that Lady Jeyne Arryn is. And even Lady Arryn went through a great deal of difficulty to hang on to the power that she had. It also seems clear that George R.R. Martin is drawing specific attention to the situation of Lady Jeyne Arryn during the Dance of the Dragons, because she similarly had difficulty of getting and maintaining power because of her gender, and because she also decreed that she wanted one of her loyal relatives, her 4th cousin, Joffrey Arryn, to inherit the Vale, rather than her cousin Arnold, who had attempted to usurp her so many times before. This is again an interesting component of this era in Westerosi history, because while succession crises were never rare, they seem to be popping up everywhere in the time surrounding the dance. And unsurprisingly, just as Rhaenyra's declared inheritance versus Aegon's legal standing caused a schism between powerful people, Lady Jeyne's decree and the legal rights of Sir Arnold became a huge problem. When the succession issue became a crisis, war broke out in the Vale, with House Redfort, Crane, Corbray, and Hunter supporting Sir Joffrey, Lady Jeyne's chosen heir, versus House Royce, Dutton, Coldwater, Tollet, Templeton, and the Lords of the Three Sisters supporting Sir Arnold. And for good measure, another Arryn, Isambard of House Arryn of Gulltown, also tried to make a claim for lordship of the Eyrie. So once again, on a much smaller scale, people were forced to confront the choices of the reigning leader regarding their successor, versus the rules that Westeros had abided by for many years. The Lords of the Vale who rallied to Sir Arnold's banners insisted that long-established laws of inheritance could not be put aside by the whim of a dying woman, while their rivals said that Lady Jeyne's commands should hold true even after her death. Spoiler alert, but Lady Jeyne's chosen heir did ultimately become Lord of the Eyrie. However, that still presents a huge issue regarding succession. Because yes, it is entirely understandable that Jeyne Arryn disinherited someone who attempted to overthrow her twice. But the notion that a leader can choose who they want to succeed them rather than following the law is a dangerous precedent to set. Frankly, neither system is anything even close to good. And in a scenario like the one that Lady Jeyne Arryn faced, it is more than understandable that she disinherited someone who attempted to usurp her. But simply choosing your heir based on what you want can obviously go wrong fast, as it makes winning the favor of people in power even more important, and could wind up unjustly punishing those who have legitimate disagreements with the actions of the person who already has more power. And obviously, creating contesting claims just makes everything messier and more dangerous for everyone. But that's not to say that it is always unjust, nor is it always impossible for women to hold positions of power. While Aegon and the green side of Viserys' family would be losing out massively because of his decision to pass the throne to Rhaenyra, that doesn't mean that it's justifiable to deny her the throne based on her gender alone. And although Rhaenys became the queen who never was, and Lady Jeyne Arryn faced a great deal of adversity, it's not as if they were shut out from Westeros' system of power completely. However, it's clear that the societal structure of the Seven Kingdoms was always built to keep women mostly excluded from roles of real importance. And even within the historical record of the Vale's succession crisis, Sir Joffrey's victory is seen as dispossessing Sir Arnold Arryn of his rightful inheritance. So not only was Rhaenyra facing a scenario that was already stacked against her, but she fought for the Iron Throne at a time that seemed to be exceptionally unfavorable toward women who were attempting to claim inheritance that had even a shred of fallibility. Unfortunately for Rhaenyra, if she does manage to sit the Iron Throne, that is hardly the end of her battle. Having a host of legitimate male heirs who many would see as Viserys' rightful inheritors would always pose a threat to her. And as Jeyne Arryn seems to demonstrate, even if she killed her strongest competitors, it's likely that a man with a claim would try to usurp her no matter what she did. Add in the obvious illegitimacy of the Strong Boys, and it's clear that Rhaenyra's bloodline would be dealing with instability and threats of losing the throne for their entire reigns. It's not fair, but the current status of potential and successful female claimants in Westeros seems to demonstrate that Rhaenyra's expectations to take the throne uncontested and put her illegitimate children in the line of inheritance behind her were pretty much unbelievable. In the eyes of most powerful men in Westeros, her claim would never be seen as superior to Aegon's, and other men who could potentially take advantage of that almost certainly would have. Sexism is undeniably built into the governing system of Westeros, and the Dance of the Dragons just so happened to occur at a time where it was exceptionally difficult for any woman to win a claim over a man. So, even if Rhaenyra manages to take the throne, it would be a constant battle to keep it. But what do you think? Were the odds always stacked against Rhaenyra becoming a reigning queen in her own right? Leave your comments and opinions below. And if you're interested in more content like this, like and subscribe.